taking the chance in 2016 to see, oh, there is something coming and perhaps it's worth to think about. And therefore it was the initiative of the government to build a working group thinking about does or which potential influence could the technology, blockchain, crypto, whatever you want to call it, have on especially, of course, the financial market in Liechtenstein. And tricky thing was how to start, more or less, then where is the starting point of a regulation when it comes to blockchain? Yeah, and to stay technical neutral. Yeah. And what I was trying to explain yesterday is our starting point, more or less, was to find a definition, a meaningful definition for a token, because, in our opinion, the token is more or less in the center, yeah? If you understand the token as a container which can contain rights in respect of whatever asset. And then you have, of course, to build or to bridge the gap between the analog world and the real world asset and the connected right and the digital representation, meaning the token, which represents the right, in order to make sure that if you transfer the token, you have transferred the underlying right. And, of course, somebody has to govern that the real-world asset then gets transferred as well, or is transferable, or is ownership is true, or whatever. Yeah.
So for Liechtenstein, it was a framework with containerization and then definition of the content of the container.
Yeah.
Did you want to comment on that?
Well, even one step back, I think the relationship between regulation and innovation cannot be underestimated. Now, I have to be careful what I'm saying here, being on Her Majesty's Island, but the British car industry was actually for years thrown back in comparison to the German one. Why? Because at some point there was a rule implemented, a red flag rule, which said that for every car, somebody with a red flag had to walk in front of it, and the car had to be manned, and it was manned predominantly at the time, by 3 at any given point. So obviously that didn't help, and it took years to get rid of that. So if you start to put something new into the context of the old, and obviously they compared it with horse carriages and sort of extrapolated the potential risk, I'm not trying to slander those people who created the rules at the time, that is a very, very difficult and very dangerous thing to do, because you stifle potentially an entire industry. Now, if you look at what gave rise to Switzerland, and then by extension to Liechtenstein, as sort of the intertwined twins in this game, was that Switzerland has a basically principle-based regulation, right? Unlike in the EU, and I'm again not trying to qualify in any way, where everything is very well defined. Switzerland has broad sets of rules, and then we get to look at things on a case-by-case basis, and that's up to the regulator. And then gradually the regulator provides guidance through circulars and so forth, which allows you to grow up with the industry, right? And with the technology as it develops, because otherwise you end up shackling it. So to get this mix right, is very difficult. So we depend on the wisdom of those in charge of it. And especially on the European level, I think we have the privilege of having Dimitrios Psarakis join later. He's one of the people holding the pen in Brussels when it comes to the creation of new rules. We cannot support those people enough. And last comment on Liechtenstein, I think the astounding thing there was that it was a combination of business and government and supervisory body, that, by the way, still comes together in the regulatory laboratory there to come up with solutions. So not to have this, kind of confrontation, negative confrontation and agitation. It's really about collaboration, sharing ideas, and to co-create with the different perspectives, so you create a set of rules that will not stifle the developments.
And I think that, just to give a perspective from the UK regulator has been quite forward-thinking. I mean, it has 2 clear remits. One is to protect the industry and good conduct and that, but it also has the remit to help develop the industry. And so it launched the sandbox, the regulatory sandbox, and it invites various cohorts to operate within a limited, permitted way, so that it can learn about these new products and services. But the recent innovation is quite interesting. It's called GFIN, the global sandbox, which brings in, I think, over 25, maybe even 30 other regulators to join and have visibility of the sandbox. This goes directly to your point of collaboration, but it's interesting that it also potentially can come from various regulators collaborating. So ideally, getting both to meet, the practice of business in the way that you suggested previously came out, where merchants helped set standards between each others to trade, combined with forward-thinking regulators, sounds like everything's going to be great. If that's the case, why are there so many challenges to this industry at the moment? Do any of you have a comment? And why are the institutions, which is the topic, so reluctant to dive in? Who wants to take that?
Well, I think there is one thing. There is a fear of the unknown.
Yes, true.
That was not the problem because the trade happened already, but had problems because there were not the standards on the agreements. I think there's a fear of the unknown. There are new ideas coming up. It's a very different way of thinking, because if you think, we like to think in institutions, in trustworthy institutions. And now, with blockchain, it's totally contrary. It's not the institution anymore. We have to trust in the technology and in the number of people. So this is a totally new way of thinking, which needs certain flexibility. Then we have a number of public and private institutions who are very heavy, who are not who have to adapt a lot of the ways they are doing. Why are very efficient payment system coming up in Africa now? Because they don't have these institutions, and they don't have bank accounts. I think there's a third thing, which I think is on the monetary side, concerning cryptocurrencies. You can be before or not. But I think if we look in history, governments don't like to let loose the monopoly they have on the creation of money. I think there is also
that's a bit sovereign for people, isn't it?
This is for the sovereign. So there's a number of ways which, or a number of facts which makes it difficult. But I think this is now the way of business.
But it's interesting, if you imagine there was a universal unit of value that was frictionless to enable trade, isn't blockchain and the units of value that we have on those getting closer to that? Any projects that you want to mention?
Oh yeah, it sure does. But just on the previous comment, from my experience working with a lot of institutions and a lot of the big players out there in the established world, I refute the notion that they're reluctant. Just because you don't hear it out in the public doesn't mean they're not working on it.
Actually, you do see them, don't you? So
yes.
How interested are they? Is it lip
They
service?
are, but again, no, they are. But again, remember, if you're being the captain of a super tanker,
you have the responsibility.
Can't move this thing like a speedboat. But the difference is that the super tanker gets to cross the ocean. The speedboat runs out of steam just when you get across this channel.
Very good analogy.
So my money, and this will not make me popular, is still on the established players, because it's a lot easier for a bank to integrate a technology solution than for a fintech player to become a bank if it has to be one to provide certain services. So what we will simply see is 5 or 10 years from now, the big players, if they're still alive, they will simply go and buy one of those, just like Switzerland missed to build investment banking, and they went about and buying Dillon Read and First Boston and whatever, and let's not go into whether it was a good idea or not, right? But this is just the way it happens. And the other thing is, which you must not forget, is it's not just technology. Blockchain is a conceptual revolution. Now, all of those entities have centralization at their heart. It's part of their DNA. When I venture like every year into the Silicon Valley, I was always surprised not to see more come out of there. Not slandering, there's great stuff coming out of there, but given, I'm a kid of the 90s.
Yeah, it's surprising. Why is that?
Well, because they all got centralization in their hearts. It runs 100% counter to their business model.
Silicon Valley is centrist. You heard this here.
Well, if you think about the business models, that's part of it. So you can't expect them to switch from A to B in a split second. I mean, efforts like the Libra project by Facebook and so forth are huge steps for them, knowing where they come from. So don't underestimate those giant leaps that have to be taken, and then don't belittle them for rising up to the challenge, but give them a little time and have some faith, my friend.
I won't push them too hard, just a little. Thomas, I wondered if you'd ask a hypothetical question. If Facebook had come to Liechtenstein and said, we want to launch Libra here, would they have been allowed to do so?
Tricky thing for me as an attorney to tell you. If
They would ask you, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would ask me, and I would tell them, "Hey, let's see. Yeah, let's see what it is, indeed, if it's regulated or if it's not regulated." That's my job, and as an attorney, advising my clients through all the regulatory issues they have. Yeah.
But to think about what Michael said, the opportunity, you're asking a nation to consider somewhat diminishing or giving up
Yeah.
their opportunity to create money.
Yeah.
So what, with your experience of the Liechtenstein regulator, what do you
To
think?
realize that Liechtenstein doesn't have its own currency, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. But what
Yeah.
would that's a very good point. But what would its approach have been? Can you guess?
To do a prediction, Günther already pointed out is
It
hard.
doesn't have its own money.
Yeah,
You're quite right.
That's hard. Yeah. But Günther also mentioned. Yeah, I would. If there would be a project similar to Libra, I would take them to the FinTech lab. Yeah?
would?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's see
How that?
that
Yeah.
goes. Yeah.
Do any of you have a view, by the way, on that? Because what the announcement of Libra did was, back to the topic of the panel, it put cryptocurrencies on the agenda of every Fortune 500 chief executive board and funds. And you have a view on that and what might happen next?
Perhaps I can step in for a second here, because the pity about Libra, in my experience, is within the European Union and its dedicated e-money regime, according to the e-money directive, regulators are quite cautious since Libra plays around, because they now have to find a way how to deal with e-money, and their assumptions in respect of e-money are sometimes ridiculous, but they have to get in that position in order to potentially get rid of Libra. So that's the regulators, that led the regulators, at least in my opinion,
I see you struggling.
find seldom ways how to interpret the e-money regime within the European Union.
Well, maybe we'll get a chance to ask a little bit more about that in a later panel. Michael, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I think with the Libra was the first really large private project for let's say, private money. Let's put it that way. It was still backed by a basket of the existing state money, but it went in the direction of the private money. And I think, and this wasn't basically not liked by the political elites, to be totally frank about it. And there's a certain reason why now certain of the large participants are pulling out. They are getting pressure.
I love the way that they're pulling out-ish, willing to observe, move to observer status and then move forward. Do you think when you say pressure, do you mean threatened?
I don't think really threatened, but when you get from your government, let's say, a call.
Hey, what are you doing?
As a CEO, have you really thought what you are doing there, or other things? Then you prefer to postpone it.
Good. I mean, I've got to ask you.
One comment on
advise-
this one
so-
comment. I
okay.
do not think that there were threats, and we have to be careful because we are judging across the Atlantic, right? So we've all read the letters that were sent by those senators. Now those senators are doing their duty. They are voicing a concern they are having, and they are asking those people in charge questions which are valid
And needs to
right?
be responded
and,
to.
And,
Quite right.
and now go to the Libra project. I mean, what do we have to base our assumptions on? We have a white paper, a rather thin white paper. We have a association to be set up in Switzerland. We don't even know where it's going to be issued and so forth. There's a lot of assumptions. As Prince Michael rightly said, it spurred a discussion, and it did a lot of things to advance this movement by bringing it to the attention of a lot of more people. What it will be in the future remains to be seen. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of some of the endeavors coming out of the Silicon Valley, but I applaud them for that. I mean, they took a stance, they took a huge risk, and they created movement, right? So that is important. What it will be, we will see. And I fully understand those companies taking a cautious approach. Again, you carry a lot of responsibility if you're one of those big credit card companies and so forth. So first of all, being at the table and participating, that takes a lot of bravery, and I applaud them to that.
Absolutely.
And now to take a cautious approach and not to fully kill it.
I mean, it was very
that's
exciting
fine.
to see so many major participants considering or joining in initially.
Right.
I think it feels a bit disappointing slipping back from that a bit.
Of course it does, but still, let's be
But-
measured. I think applaud them for trying. And again, let's be clear, I'm a decentralization disciple, right? So this is not decentralized, and I don't even understand why they need the blockchain for it. But that's a whole different story. I applaud them for helping us to move and advance this space.
Absolutely. We are unfortunately running out of time. Does anyone have one question for this particular panel? Right in the middle over the back there, Gillian, would you mind leaping to your feet, grabbing a microphone, sprinting over, finding the microphone? There's microphone ninja. Would you mind saying your name? Unfortunately, we have one question. What time for one question?
Thank you very much. Good presentation. My name is Leon Molchanovsky, Galaxy Consulting. I heard that in Switzerland now it's possible to buy real estate using crypto. If we speak about asset managers or fund managers that manage 100 million or maybe 1 billion of portfolios of real estate, say commercial real estate, one of the ways to sell such portfolios is via securitization. Do you think the current legal framework allows doing that securitization for a big portfolio of that size? And if so, maybe some of those institutional investors will invest into such a portfolio? Thanks.
Well, that was one of the first efforts that have been undertaken, because real estate obviously is one of the most important existing asset classes, and so people tried to tokenize that from the get-go. That was largely and rightly so based on the current framework shut down by the regulator for the simple reason that the moment you start with a portfolio, you basically get into the territory of the fund regime, right? It looks like a fund, it smells like a fund, it behaves like a fund, it most
Probably
likely
is
is a
one.
fund, right? So what it means is you would have to tokenize it individually, object by object by object, and tokenize that, which obviously makes it very inefficient. Now, so that's the reason we need to adapt the law to allow for that. Right now, if you want to do it in the classical sense, create a portfolio, tokenize that, it doesn't work unless you tick the box of the fund regulation, i.e. you bring a regulated fund manager to the table. That being said, there's currently some real estate tokenization projects going on in Switzerland relating not to Switzerland because there's other restrictions with ownership of property and nationality and whatnot anyway, that are currently in private sale, I believe, but will soon be moving towards more public things, which I again believe will raise the awareness of these opportunities.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have much more time to continue, but thank all three of you for helping raise our awareness of this a little more, the fact that industry should be moving forward, the regulators are catching up, and as a decentralist, you actually would love it to move forward but I think are taking a measured approach so the industry moves forward without breaking itself. I think it's probably a good way forward. If anybody wants further discussions with our panelists, I'm sure they'll be here afterwards. But for now, please put your hands together and thank my panelists very much indeed. Thank you.